So this is the fun bit, everyone. Grab all your fabric scraps and we'll work out how we'll patch and combine them together to make whole pieces of fabric. So just think about whether you want to use some small fabric scraps to build up larger fabric pieces, or whether you'd prefer to use larger pieces and only have a few patches. It depends on whether you're going to be doing hand stitching or machine stitching and how much time you have. In this clip, I'm going to show you how to combine your fabric patches either kind of randomly, just any kind of sizes, like this one. And I'm also going to show you more of a precise way of organising your fabric scraps, which is kind of like quilting. It's up to you, whatever you want to do. You can put your scrap bits of fabric together in an ad hoc kind of way. So if you are going for the ad hoc kind of way of patching, then always make sure that you're cutting on the straight grain. It's really important, especially when you've got the checks. It's very obvious when you're not cutting on a straight grain. So next I'll just get, so this is my random sort of patches. I'll get another piece of scrap fabric, make sure it's all cut square, and I'll sew my right sides together, and I'll end up with a ad hoc kind of patch. Following my chalk line, and I'll have to iron down the seam allowances properly at the back. So I just want to show you what open seam allowances are. So on the underside, it's basically where you've got your two seam allowances, you open them out and press them down. Obviously you have to press your seam allowances down as you go, not all at the end. To do your top stitch, put your presser foot against the seam and move your needle position across to the left, so it's ensuring that you'll sew down the seam allowance underneath. If you don't have a sewing machine and you're hand stitching, no problem. I'm going to show you. So thread your needle and loop over once so there's two strands, and make sure that you tie a knot in the end. So whether you're machine stitching or hand stitching, you always need to make sure you get your pieces and identify which is the right side and the wrong side, and you always stitch your seams right sides together. So this is the right side, this is the right side, and I'm going to put them together, and I'll stitch along here, 1 centimetre seam allowance. So if you're hand stitching, I'm going to be showing you 3 types of hand stitches, which are back stitch, running stitch and slip stitch, all really straightforward and easy. So I'm just going to be sewing 2 of my patches together here using back stitch. So if you just start off, I always go through and put my needle back through on itself, so the end has got a knot in it, and that just ties it off nice and secure. And now I'm going to go through that hole. I've actually drawn a line using chalk, so I know my 1 centimetre seam allowance will be accurate. So for back stitch, make your gaps all about 1/2 centimetre each. So just see how I'm putting my needle into the same hole from the previous stitch, going past where that thread's coming out, going past 1/2 centimetre or 0.5, and I just keep doing that. As you can see, I have drawn a chalk mark to indicate where my 1 centimetre seam allowance needs to go along here. So it's really, really important that you're doing that to specification, 1 centimetre seam allowances. That's an important part of this competency. So just make sure you securely tie off your end. So I go through the loop on itself, and that forms a little slip knot, and I can cut off the tail. So you'll end up opening out your seam allowance, pressing that down, and then on the right side, for the people that are hand stitching, you're going to do a running stitch on either side of the seam, and that's to hold down the seam allowance, and it also gives a really nice looking sort of aesthetic, which I'll show you. So I hand stitched the blue to the yellow, then pressed open the seam allowance. I hand stitched the red to the green, opened up the seam allowance and pressed it down. Then I hand stitched this side to this side and did the same with the seam allowance, but just seam allowances, all 1 centimetre, all open, and you have to open them out as you go along, not at the end. So on the other side, I'm just going to show you now how to do a running stitch, which will hold down your seam allowances, and you will do a top stitch if you're using a sewing machine. So the trick with a running stitch is to try and get the stitch length and the gaps all equal in length. And all you're doing with your needle is going over, under. I do about 3 at a time. And your distance from the seam for a running stitch in this case is 0.5 centimetres. So I've done running stitch down this side of this seam, this side of this seam, and now I need to do it down this side of this seam and this side of this seam. I'm going to show you how to cut your fabric out if you'd like to combine your patches or your fabric scraps in more of an accurate, precise kind of way. So this square is exactly 18 centimetres, exactly 10 and exactly 6. And if you cut out multiple pieces like that, I can show you how you can combine them so they all fit together. So 4 of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, have been joined together. They started off being 6 centimetres each in size. And you'll see that that now is exactly the same size as one of those 10 centimetre square pieces. And if I cut out 4 of these and sewed them together, they would fit in this 18 centimetre square piece. So you can see how they can all sort of patch together really accurately. So I have been very particular about how I've measured out these square shapes. They're exactly 10 centimetres by 10 centimetres, and I've got 2 here. I'll cut them out next, but be very precise. You can see I've arranged all the different pieces and had an idea as to how I might like to combine them. And although they don't look like they match up exactly here, once they're sewed together with all the seam allowances accounted for, it will.